Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm really excited. Thank you, Darren, for being with us today. And Darren, if I remember well, I met you when I was a student at Wesleyan. That's some years back, before you were in Ford Foundation. And when I met you, I knew I met a special man. And since then, up to now, you have been a good friend. Every time in New York, I have to pass by to say hi. So I'm so excited to have you today. And I've been really following up what you've been doing. At the same time, very empowering, and amazing. You have always spoken out about the need for more justice, in the world and in the way philanthropy works. And you have shifted forward in some important ways. I remember we committed 1 billion from the endowment to the mission-related investments. I'm one of the BUILD beneficiaries, starting with BUILD program to strengthen organizations working on inequality. These are bold moves and are really shifting the power in the philanthropy world. You know what I mean? And recently, Darren, I have been excited to see that Ford stepping up in the response to COVID-19. And I want to start off with some of the questions around that. Darren, when I read this, it was a big news. You know what I mean? $1 billion in a social bond to use the proceeds to increase giving over the next 2 years is really an incredible move. So this is my question, Darren. This is seen as a radical move. Do you think it's a radical move?
Well, first, Kennedy, I can't start by answering that question without first just telling you how proud I am of you, because I do remember that day that we met when you were a Wesleyan student, and I saw in you remarkable promise, passion, compassion, and a sense of commitment to returning to your country and making a big difference there. And it has been so heartwarming to see you actually do that. It is not always the case, because for many Africans, many others who come to the United States to study, they get intoxicated by the experience or the opportunity for economic advancement or other appealing attributes of living in this country, keep them here. But it is so amazing to see you be true to your word, that your first and foremost commitment was to the people of Kenya, and that you had to return. You were compelled to return. You had no choice but to follow your conscience and return. And what you are doing there is one of the reasons I am here to salute you. I do believe that the work that we are doing at the Ford Foundation is important, and innovations like the social bond, which I'm proud that the foundation has pioneered, and the $1 billion that we hope to distribute to NGOs in the US and in the global South, that is meaningful investment to those organizations. But it is really you and the thousands of leaders like you across the continent who represent the future. And we foundations, we philanthropists and donors are but small players in the transformation that needs to happen. Yes, we have some resources, but without people like you on the front lines who are courageous, who are challenging the powerful, the rich, to account for, to be responsible to their fellow countrymen and women. Without you all doing this work, our investments would be meaningless. And so you give meaning to our work, and you are so many things to us, Kennedy, but you are a North Star for what is right, what is just, what is necessary in Kenya during this very challenging time.
Thank you so much, Darren. And I just feel like what you did, honestly, is you really took that opportunity. You know, when people are still worried, you went ahead, and that's why I see you don't see it as a radical move for you. I can say you see it as something that must be done.
It had to be done. I mean, I think the notion of radical. I mean, what was important was we foundations and donors, when the stock market goes down, we pull back. And usually that's the very time when communities are in crisis and need us more. And that asymmetry has been something that has worried me throughout my 20 years, first at Rockefeller and at Ford, because I've experienced it during the downturns. And I was really inspired because there was an opportunity, and I understand how markets work. Remember, I spent 8 years on Wall Street, and I certainly understand how the capital markets work, and understanding that the policy of the US Federal Reserve made it possible to borrow at historically low rates. And for a AAA, highly desirable organization in the markets like a Ford Foundation, we would have some leverage to achieve the dual objective of, first, generating more money to give away, because that had to happen. In my estimation, it is indefensible during a crisis, a pandemic, for a foundation to say we are going to pay out our legally required 5% and 5% only. That is indefensible to me. And it was indefensible to the Ford trustees. They felt strongly and absolutely were in alignment with me and the leadership team at Ford in that we had to do something more. The other thing that you mentioned is the how we give away is as important as how much we give away, because for too long, too many donors have provided resources with strings attached in ways that actually are counterproductive, in ways that actually undermine the very publicly stated objectives that we donors seek. We have to treat our partners like partners, not contract workers. And I think making that move psychologically, emotionally, financially is going to be critical in the next wave of philanthropy. The first wave of philanthropy in the 20th century in the global South, in Africa, was in many ways a very patronizing approach to philanthropy. And I believe that we have learned lessons, including my own foundation, about the importance of really listening to the people, the leaders who are closest to the problems we seek to solve, and to not privilege the credentials, the credential knowledge of experts over the lived experience, the wisdom, and the knowledge that people who are closest to the problem possess and bring, which we do not possess or bring that perspective. So that's one of the other lessons, and that's been a part of the Build Initiative, which I'm so proud that you are, SHOFCO is a part of. But we have a lot of work to do to improve how we work in the Global South. We at the Ford Foundation can do better, and all donors must do better if we are to be effective.
Thank you. That's a very good point, as you say, because I remember very well as a young entrepreneur coming from the global south, you are being told to provide the data, M&D. It was really sad. So what happened is that most of the privileged entrepreneurs are ending up able to get this funding. And what Ford does, which I really admire so much, is that you are giving that support for the systems. Instead of just asking for the metrics, you are supporting the organizations to be able to work on their structures. And I think that for me is very powerful. As you know, everything is data. And many organizations are struggling because nobody wants to support that. So for me, that's really powerful. So that is the next question. That's a good move, but what is your message to the other global foundations as they try to fight poverty? What is your message to them?
Well, I think one message is we have been dancing around the root causes of these problems for too long. And the root causes are often very challenging things. The root causes may be patriarchy and misogyny when it comes to empowering women and girls, cultural norms that make women and girls be deemed the chattel, the possession of men. And I think we have to address those root causes. When we look at the root causes of economic inequality, of violence, there is a relationship there. And what I say to donors is, we have to be clear about what it is we're seeking. Are we seeking transformation? Or are we seeking token transactions? I think if we're seeking transactions, it's business as usual. If we're seeking transformation, we have to really invest in the people and believe in the people and support them even when they sometimes become radical and really think outside of the box, because it's those outside of the box thinkers who actually move the dial on changing the hearts and minds and changing policy in a country. So we donors have work to do to be better stewards, to be better partners, and to listen. And that listening part is often the hardest part, because I don't mean say the words listen, because donors say all the time, we're here to listen. I mean to internalize the words in your practice, in your behavior, in the way in which you engage, which will be uncomfortable if we are to be true to the objective of justice.
Wow, that's really powerful. And that brings me back to your blog that I've been fan of reading. And you talk about, let me put some of them a little bit, if I remember. This is what you said: nonprofits themselves need to be courageous, creative leaders willing to face what lies ahead and invent their operating models and budgets to stay viable and thrive in a post-coronavirus world. And finally, you said something that tackling inequality will require listening and elevating the lived experience, I love that, over ego and abstract expertise. So I know you've been a really big fighter of what is called inequality. And I think inequality for me is everything. That's why we have Kibera, that's why we have slums, and it's the root cause of everything. I mean, and then for me, it's also connected to the systematical change. For this to change, we need to change those structures. So when I look, Darren, let's go back to this. What's happening in America and what's happening in the world now? People see COVID-19. And then the more I think about COVID, I feel like you can live in a 3-bedroom house. You know, you can afford, you have a fridge, put that in your house, and you have a mile, you're told, no, don't go out, you stay there. But what about people who are living below $2, who don't have a saving? So, and inequality, Darren, is not only in Kenya, not only in the global South. I think it's even so huge in the global north. And the more I read about these things, and I want to hear your view, I feel like coronavirus just really is not equalizer. It just made the curtain to fall. And we saw the injustice. The people of colors who are dying, who cannot afford the healthcare. And I think people said enough is enough. And we cannot just say this thing as just fighting the virus. We have to, not police brutality, we have to go back and change those things. If you think about philanthropy, how do they make the money? How to be careful. But how do they make the wealth? Okay? And it's still part of colonial mindset. And it's becoming, it's something really, really, we have to think deep about it. And I don't want to pick your view on that. This is the moment of things to change. What's your take on that, Darren?
Well, I agree that inequality is a scourge, a global threat. There is no doubt that what we are seeing manifest in Kenya, in the United States, the social unrest, the way in which COVID is not an equalizer, rather it is a reinforcer and a compounder of the pre-existing health inequalities and economic inequalities. And if you understand inequality in America, it is no surprise that the vast majority of people who are testing positive, who have diagnoses of corona, are white, and the vast majority of those who are dying are Black and brown. That is a manifestation of the raw, crude level of inequality and the depth of which inequality has a hold on our society and all of its systems, whether it's our health systems, our justice systems, our education systems, our housing systems. And I think the opportunity here that philanthropy can help, especially as we look at America, for example, on the long under-addressed issue of racism and anti-Blackness, is that the murder of George Floyd made deniability no longer an option. Because throughout our 400 years on this continent, white Americans have always found a way to justify and deny that racism was as bad as it was and had the hold on our nation as it does. And that murder in broad daylight on a major boulevard with the police officer fully cognizant that he was being videotaped, killing a Black man. His assumption that he would be able to do that with impunity would be a pretty normative thought across the country in terms of the way our police law enforcement work in Black neighborhoods. And so we had a situation where we saw this murder. And so what is philanthropy to do? I think philanthropy has to support those people in the streets who are demanding justice, peacefully protesting for what is right, those who are raising the issue of inequality in our policing system, inequality in our justice system, our criminal justice system especially. And philanthropy has a role to play in resourcing those ideas, the ideas like how do we reimagine policing? Who's doing the research on that? Who's doing the research on alternative ways to have people be accountable for their misdeeds? Who are the institutions? What institutions are leading this effort? And who are the people? Those people are often marginalized by media, by conservatives who want to smear them or take their record and distort their words. Philanthropy has a role to play, I believe, in standing with and behind and supporting many of those people. But it will take work because there are efforts to keep the normative way in which our society is organized, to keep all of these systems and structures that are so unfair and so unequal in place. I know, Kennedy, you want to go to questions probably, because you and I could talk for hours.
I love it. Please continue. Yeah. So just to add on something on the philanthropy. So as I went to America to study, Darren, I saw something which is a colonial mindset. Most of the foundations are willing to have a book that you only get money if you are from privileged family, you went to Harvard or which colleges, and you know how to write as them. And this mentality that, which I think is colonial, the community are not the solution. Scalability is done on a table, and I hope this is a time that this thing can change, because it's been happening for a long time, whereby grassroots organizations, they are not getting enough support, just because, and not only in the global South, also the global in America, whereby you see brown, black, people of color, their initiatives don't go far, okay, because they are being judged. What is your take on this?
Well, my take is that I agree with it. First, that we see in the North, in the US, for example, Black and Brown led organizations, which are smaller usually, do not have endowments or significant cash reserves or a board who can do a fundraising campaign to keep the doors open. The Black and Brown organizations don't have this, just as in the global South. The grassroots organizations, the organizations like your organization, SHOFCO, do not have the resources of care and the major multilateral organizations headquartered in Geneva and the World Bank and these places, who are the favored organizations because they are usually led by some American or European, and we see that same bias repeat itself both in the North and the South. And so what we're doing at Ford is to do our best to take an equity lens to our funding. We see in the US much of our work through the lens of racial equity, of racial justice. And so we prioritize funding for organizations that are led by and serving people of color, communities. In the South, we do our very best through our offices to work closely with organizations like yours, and not run our money through some intermediary in Washington or London, who in turn re-grants to the African NGOs. But to work as closely as we can. We have not perfected this by a long run. There are many people who would wish that we had more resources, starting with me. But we do our very best, but that still, I don't believe, is good enough. We have to do better, and working with friends like you help us to do better and be better.
Thank you. Then I'll be in trouble if I don't say this. I was sent by some members, your friends, when you came to Kibera, and they know I'm talking to you. So I have a message to you. Sometimes people don't understand grassroots organizing, but today we have organized over 400,000 people in the slums in Kenya.
Wow.
And for your surprise, and you'll be impressed by this, the government of Kenya has now plugged into Sun to help them to fight COVID. You see that change? So now we're seeing the power of grassroots. So they're the one going to the household, talking about the myths. People still believe that Corona is a disease of white people. I say that. So we have to go door to door. And change will only happen when the community are taking are now the one taking the initiative. So we've been doing that a lot and working with the government to try to pass the message down. Because as you know, we love WHO, we love Ministry of Health, but their message sometimes doesn't resonate well on the ground. For example, right now the government has brought in a new program of home care, home-based care for those who are positive. Question, how do you do that in a 10 by 10 room with 6 other members of the family? So that's when community members like Sun comes in to help. So anyway, I want just to give you that because I know you know about the SHOFCO network.
It's so great to hear the impact and to know that this could not have happened without your leadership and the leadership of so many others. And I appreciate that it's not just about you, but about the people who you work with and the community you have built, the organizing on the ground, which is just a model.
Perfect. There is a question for us here. Let me read it. Yeah, question from Ellen Agla, I think, from the End Fund. What does decolonizing development mean for you, and what steps need to be taken by funders in particular to support this work? Please, Darren.
Great question, Ellen. I think decolonizing development starts with ideology.
Whoa.
The ideology of colonization remains with us on the continent, just as the ideology of white supremacy remains with us in the United States. And I think we have to systematically dismantle the elements that hold that ideology in place. And that the institutions who are responsible need to reconsider and reinstantiate a different kind of ideology, an ideology that says we are going to put the voices of the people in the community at the top of the process. The greatest manifestation that I ever saw of colonial development and colonial philanthropy ideology was how at the foundations, at the World Bank and donors, there was well into the 1970s and 80s, a dissonance because the support staff, the drivers, the tea lady, the administrative support were all Kenyan in the case of our Nairobi office. The grant makers, the program officers, the director, the people with access to resources and who controlled the way power and influence and money was dispersed were all white, were all Americans or Europeans. And it took a long time for even that to change. It was not literally until the late 90s that we started to see at places like Rockefeller and Ford and other institutions, Africans in charge of Africa programs, Nigerians in charge of the office in Nairobi, Nigerians in charge of the office in Lagos, Kenyans in charge of the office in Nairobi. We did not have that before. And that to me is such a manifestation and has shown how far we have to go. We have moved clearly beyond that. And I'm proud to say in our offices, all of the staff are local or from some other global South country. But just that move is but one small but very meaningful way in which we decolonize. How do we, in the process of developing strategy, listen to the pleas of local communities and hear what they believe are the priorities for their country and their region? Where do we put them in the consultative process? So there are ways in which I can see us systematically making changes and pulling the levers of the way power and influence and resources are addressed, distributed, dispersed, that I think would begin to demonstrate that we mean business about this idea of decolonizing development.
Thank you. I like that. The second question we have here from Valerie of Rockefeller. How does philanthropy differ between the US and Africa? And I'll try to answer that, then Darren, you can add. As you say that, I feel Africa is an old continent, at the same time is a new continent because it was colonized and resources taken away. And in the 1960s is when most of the countries in Africa started getting independent. So some people are still making more wealth. They're not yet satisfied, so they're making more. But the Africans are really philanthropic in a different way. They help their families, their neighbors, but I feel like we're not yet there where things become structured, which I hope that comes with time. I mean, so I see more American philanthropy or the global north is much more structured. So we are missing that in Africa, but doesn't mean that they're not doing philanthropy. So they are doing it in a different way. Darren, anything to add on that?
I think you're right. And as I've observed it, and of course, Valerie Rockefeller is the chair of the board of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And that philanthropy does some remarkable, very courageous work on climate change, on impact investing, on issues of race in philanthropy. And I wish more followed Valerie's lead. What I will say that I have observed is that just as in the US and Africa, communities do have community philanthropy. Sometimes there is this narrative that philanthropy is something that is unique to wealthy people, wealthy white and European people. And that is not true. As you say, people have mechanisms for mutual aid, as we've called it in the US, to ensure that the burials happen back in the rural village, that there is sustenance, livelihood opportunities, that people provide each other, that the networks that people develop and the social capital that is the currency in many of these communities is a form of philanthropy. And so I actually know in the US that African Americans are philanthropic, but as you say, at scale and in a directed way, we have not achieved that. And part of the reason we have not achieved that is the same reason in Africa. Black people have been prevented from accumulating assets and intergenerational wealth. This has been part of a larger racist economic system that unfortunately is not necessarily, and is not designed as racist. I don't believe capitalism, for example, is racist. I believe there are racist capitalists. And I think we have to address that issue head on. But I think the philanthropy issue in the US and in Africa, on the continent, are real, and we are very lucky to have the philanthropy we do. We just need more of it, and we need an economy that helps more Africans and more African Americans create their own philanthropy. Kennedy, I want to thank you for this. I know we've gone over, but I would, with you, we could go on all afternoon, but it is such a treat to see you, my friend, and to just know how critical your leadership is, SHOFCO is, to not only the country, but the world. So we are depending on you. We are looking forward to the great things you're going to do in the future, and know that the Ford Foundation will be with you on the journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren, for your time. It was really innovative. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience really loved it. So thanks so much. I will keep in touch.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Take care.